I ghosted my cheating wife, and she had a total meltdown. Now everyone's blaming me. All right, so let me start by saying that I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. I mean, I've seen people post stuff about their lives going sideways, but it's wild when it happens to you. Anyway, here it goes. My name's Matt, I'm 34, and at the time this all went down, I'd been married to Claire for just shy of 10 years. If you asked me back then, I would have said our marriage was solid. Like, we had the usual ups and downs, but who doesn't, right? So here's where it gets crazy. I was on a work trip, supposed to come back home on a Friday, but our meetings wrapped up early, so I figured I'd surprise Claire by coming back a day ahead of schedule. Seemed like a sweet idea, right? I didn't call her or anything because I thought it'd be cool to just show up and maybe grab dinner together, spend some time after being away. Normal stuff. Anyway, I'm driving back, and about 20 miles from home, I realized I was running on fumes. The last thing I needed was to get stuck on the side of the road, so I took the next exit and stopped to fill up. Now here's where things start to go sideways. As I'm pulling out of the gas station, I spot this car that looks exactly like Claire's. I mean, the same model, color, even the license plate looked familiar, but it's like a couple miles from our house. Weird, right? My first thought was, what's she doing over here? Because this area wasn't anywhere close to the grocery store she usually goes to, or anywhere she'd normally be. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I figured maybe she had some errand to run she hadn't mentioned earlier. No big deal, but still it felt a little off, so I called her. She picks up after a few rings, and I swear, she sounded a little out of breath. Nothing too crazy, but when something just feels wrong, like you can hear it in someone's voice? She goes, "Hey, I was just about to call you." She says she's running some errands, nothing special. But her voice, I don't know, man, something was off. I asked her where she was, and she hesitated for a second like she didn't expect me to ask. That was red flag number one. Then she tells me she's heading to the grocery store near our place. But here's the thing, she's not heading toward our place. I saw her car go in the opposite direction just a few minutes earlier. I didn't call her out on it right then and there. I mean, part of me was thinking maybe I was being paranoid, and the other part of me was curious to see where this was going. So I told her, "Cool, I'll meet you at the store. Maybe we can grab dinner afterward?" She hesitates again, like she's processing what I just said. Then she goes, "Sure, that sounds great." But you could hear it in her voice. She wasn't expecting me to say that. I'm not gonna lie. My stomach was doing flips at this point. The more I thought about it, the more things started to click together in my head. Why was she acting weird? Why did she lie about where she was going? And why did she sound so damn nervous when I called? But I played it cool. I told her I was only a few minutes away, even though I knew she was probably speeding to beat me to the store. I figured I'd test her, see if she'd try to cover it up. Sure enough, as soon as we hung up, I saw her car fly past me in the opposite direction. She had to be going at least 90, trying to get to the store before I showed up. I guess she thought if she got there first, she could make it seem like she was just running errands, like she said. I took my time, though. I wasn't in a rush. I pulled into the parking lot, and there she was, standing outside the store, adjusting her clothes and fixing her hair in the side mirror of her car. She didn't see me at first, so I just watched her for a second. It was weird, like she was trying to pull herself together before I got there. I finally pulled up, and she immediately walked over to me, all smiles, acting like nothing was wrong. She suggested we just grab some groceries and head home instead of going out, which was fine by me. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about how sketchy she was acting. Like, why did she lie? Why was she out of breath when I called? And why was she so jumpy? Anyway, we go inside, and the first thing she says is she needs to use the bathroom. Okay, whatever, people need to use the bathroom, but here's where it gets weird. She disappears into the restroom for like 15 minutes. I'm standing there waiting, and I could hear the sink running the whole time. It doesn't take 15 minutes to wash your hands. I didn't say anything, but I was getting more and more suspicious. I had that gut feeling something was off, but I didn't have any hard proof yet. When she finally came out, she looked a little flustered, but she just smiled and said, "Sorry, I had to do a number two." Now, I don't want to get too graphic, but I know when someone's lying. I didn't hear any of the usual bathroom sounds, if you get what I'm saying. I think she was in there cleaning up after doing something. I don't know what, but it wasn't what she was telling me. We finished shopping, got some pre-made food, and headed home. I didn't push her on anything at that point. I figured I'd wait and see if she slipped up again. But that whole night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on behind my back. She went to bed like nothing happened, but I stayed up, wide awake, just replaying everything in my head. It was like everything was normal on the outside. But inside, I knew our marriage wasn't what I thought it was. You know when you can't put your finger on something but you just know? That's where I was at. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything else. I had no idea just how deep it was going to go, but I knew that was the moment things changed. All right, so after that weird night at the grocery store, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. You know how people say to trust your gut? Well, mine was screaming at me, but I still wasn't sure what I was dealing with. Was she cheating? Was she hiding something else? I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. A few days went by and I tried to act normal. I didn't want to tip her off that I was suspicious. Meanwhile, Claire was just going about her life like nothing happened, like everything was fine. But I started noticing more and more little things that didn't sit right with me. For starters, her phone. I know it's not cool to snoop, but she was always on it, constantly texting someone. Every time I asked who it was, she'd say it was just work or some friend from her book club. Now, maybe that's true, but it's like she was glued to the damn thing, and she never used to be like that. It wasn't just the texting either, it was the way she'd lock her phone immediately after reading a message, like she didn't want me to see what she was talking about. That's what really got me. If everything was normal, why was she being so secretive? So one day while she was in the shower, I decided to take a quick look. I'm not proud of it, but I had to know what was going on. The thing is, she was smart. She didn't leave anything suspicious on her phone, no weird texts, no pictures, nothing. Either she was really careful or she was using some other method to keep things hidden. It almost made me feel crazy, like I was imagining everything, but my gut wouldn't let it go. Then came the late nights. Now Claire's job sometimes required her to stay late, especially around deadlines, so it wasn't out of the ordinary for her to work late every now and then. But suddenly, it was happening more often. And not just by an hour or two, she'd be home at 9 or 10 at night, acting like it was no big deal. The excuses were always the same. We're working on a big project, or I had to stay and help with something at the office. But the timing was just too convenient. One night, she told me she'd be working late again and I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to do something about it. Instead of sitting at home wondering where she was, I drove to her office. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but if she was telling the truth, then no harm done, right? Well, when I got there, her car wasn't in the parking lot. I drove around the block a few times, waiting to see if maybe she had parked somewhere else or was running late. But nope, no sign of her. Now here's where things started clicking into place for me. Remember that neighborhood where I saw her car the other week? I decided to take a detour and drive by just to see if she was there. And what do you know? As I'm cruising down that same street, there's her car, parked in front of the same house. The same damn house with the same pickup truck in the driveway. I felt my blood boiling, but I didn't do anything rash. I parked a little way down the street, out of sight, and just sat there. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I had to see something. I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. After about 30 minutes of sitting in my car, I saw the front door of the house open. Out walks Claire with that guy, Nick, who I later found out was her coworker. They were laughing, talking like they didn't have a care in the world. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just working late. She was spending her extra hours with this guy. I didn't confront her right then and there because honestly, I wasn't ready. I needed to process what I'd just seen. So instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures of her car in the driveway and them talking in front of the house. I figured I'd need them later, just in case she tried to deny anything. I drove back home, my head spinning. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to just pack up and leave, but another part of me wanted more information before I made any big moves. I wasn't the kind of guy to throw away almost a decade of marriage without knowing exactly what was going on. The next day, I didn't say anything to her. I acted like everything was fine. We had dinner together, talked about our days, the usual stuff. But I was watching her closely, trying to figure out if she'd slip up or give me any clues about where she'd really been the night before. She didn't. Claire was a good liar. I'll give her that. She didn't flinch or hesitate when she told me about her late night at work. She even said they ordered pizza for dinner at the office. It would have been convincing if I hadn't known the truth. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on her, trying to catch more evidence of what was going on. Every time she said she was working late, I'd drive by that same house, and every time, there she was, parked out front. I didn't see Nick again, but I didn't need to. I already knew what was happening. At this point, I was just biding my time. I needed to figure out my next move, but I couldn't rush it. I didn't want to make a scene without being fully prepared, so I kept gathering my evidence, waiting for the right moment to confront her. And the lies kept piling up. Claire would tell me she was at work, that she was stuck in traffic, that she had a late meeting, and all the while, I knew exactly where she was and what she was doing. But she didn't know that I knew. I started distancing myself from her without making it too obvious. I didn't want her to suspect anything yet. If she thought everything was normal, she'd keep making mistakes, and I needed her to slip up. At the same time, I was preparing myself for what was coming next. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. Eventually, I'd have to confront her, but I wanted to make sure I had everything in place before I did. I wasn't sure how she'd react. Would she come clean? Would she lie again? I didn't know, but I was ready for whatever was coming. All I knew was that our marriage wasn't what I thought it was, and once I laid everything out on the table, there'd be no going back. All right, so things had been pretty tense for a while, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had enough proof that Claire was cheating, but I wasn't sure how I wanted to approach it. Part of me wanted to confront her the second I saw her with Nick outside that house, but another part of me wanted to be smart about it. I didn't want her to twist the situation and make me seem like the bad guy, you know? I needed everything to be laid out so she couldn't weasel her way out of it. One night, about a week after I saw her at Nick's house, she came home late again. She walked in like nothing was wrong, smiling and asking me how my day was. I played along, told her my day was fine, and asked how hers went. She gave me the same excuse as before: late night at work, lots of projects piling up. But this time, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I stared at her for a second, and then I just said, "Are you really going to keep lying to my face like that?" She looked at me, confused. Or at least she pretended to be confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, acting all innocent. That just made me even more pissed off. "I know about Nick," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. "I've seen you with him, Claire. I know what's been going on." For a split second, I saw a flash of panic in her eyes, but she covered it up quickly. "Nick? What are you talking about?" She was still trying to play dumb, but I wasn't falling for it. "I've seen you at his house, multiple times. You told me you were working late, but you were with him." I didn't even need to go into the details yet, but I wanted to see if she'd try to lie her way out of it. She stood there, staring at me, probably trying to figure out what to say next. "It's not what you think," she finally said, which made me want to laugh. That's always the first thing they say when they get caught, right? "We're just friends. He's going through a rough time, and I've been helping him out." I raised an eyebrow. "Helping him out? At his house? Late at night? Claire, do you hear yourself right now? You're not fooling anyone." She started getting defensive at that point, like she thought maybe if she got angry, I'd back off. "You've been spying on me? Following me? That's insane, Matt. You're being paranoid." I didn't let her distract me. "I'm not being paranoid, Claire. I saw you too. I know you've been lying to me for weeks." There was a long silence after that. I could see her wheels turning, trying to figure out if there was any way to dig herself out of this hole, but she knew I had her. There was no way out. So she changed tactics. She switched from defensive to upset, tears welling up in her eyes. "Okay, fine," she said, her voice shaky. "I screwed up, all right? But it wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything." I just stood there staring at her. I wasn't buying it. "It didn't mean anything? Claire, you've been sneaking around with this guy for weeks, lying to me every time you walk through that door. You think that doesn't mean anything?" She started crying for real then, and I could feel the frustration boiling inside me. I wanted to yell, to scream at her for what she'd done, but I held it together. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "Why, Claire? Why did you do it?" She wiped her eyes and looked at me, like she didn't know how to answer that. "I don't know," she whispered. "It just happened." "Things don't just happen," I snapped. "You made a choice, Claire. You chose to cheat on me." She didn't respond right away. She just stood there, sobbing quietly. I couldn't tell if she was crying because she was actually sorry or because she got caught. Honestly, I didn't care anymore. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "But you did," I shot back. "You hurt me, Claire. You betrayed me. Do you even understand what you've done?" She nodded, but I wasn't sure if she really did. I mean, how could she? How could someone who's supposed to love you just throw everything away like that? "I'll end it," she said suddenly. "I'll end it with Nick. We can fix this, Matt. Please, we can work through it." I shook my head. "It's too late for that." She looked at me, desperation in her eyes. "No, it's not. We can go to counseling. We can talk this through. I love you, Matt. I do." I didn't believe her. How could I? She'd been lying to me for weeks, maybe even months. Whatever love we had, she killed it the moment she decided to be with someone else. "I don't think you do," I said, my voice cold. "If you really loved me, you wouldn't have done this." "I made a mistake," she pleaded. "Please, give me a chance to make it right." I stood there, staring at her, And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no love. Just nothing. I can't do this anymore, I said, finally breaking the silence. I'm done. She froze. What do you mean? You can't just leave. I'm done, Claire, I interrupted. I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. I can't trust you, and without trust, there's nothing left. She started crying harder, trying to grab my arm, but I pulled away. Please, Matt, don't do this. We can fix it, I swear. But I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was made up. There was no fixing this. You can't come back from something like this. I'll pack my things tomorrow, I said quietly. We'll figure out the rest later. And just like that, I walked away. I didn't raise my voice, didn't slam the door, didn't do anything dramatic. I just walked out, and in that moment, I felt more at peace than I had in weeks. Claire called my name as I left, but I didn't look back. That was it. There was no going back now. After I walked out that night, things got real quiet. It was like the calm after a storm, but not in a peaceful way. More like when you're standing there, looking around at the mess that just happened, and you know you've got to deal with the cleanup. That's exactly what it felt like. I didn't go far that first night. I stayed with my buddy Jake, who didn't ask too many questions, just let me crash on his couch and left it at that. I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. I didn't even know where to start. The next morning, I went back to the house. I didn't want to drag things out, and I definitely didn't want to be there when Claire was. The last thing I needed was another round of her crying and begging me to stay. So I got there early, packed up some clothes, my laptop, and a few things I knew I'd need for the next few weeks. It felt weird, packing up my life like that, but I didn't want to stay in that house any longer than I had to. Every corner of it felt tainted now. As I was packing, my phone started blowing up. Claire had figured out I wasn't coming back, and she wasn't happy about it. I didn't even read most of the messages. A few were her saying how sorry she was, that we could work through this if I just gave her a chance. Then the next few were angry, like she was pissed that I'd actually walked out. It was like she couldn't believe I'd go through with it. I blocked her number. It wasn't because I didn't want to hear from her at all. It was more that I needed some space to think. I needed to breathe without her constant messages pulling me back into the mess. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew I couldn't stay in contact with her while I figured it out. After I blocked her, things got quiet again. The silence was kind of eerie, but it was also what I needed. Jake wasn't asking me a bunch of questions, and I wasn't in a rush to explain. I didn't want to sound like one of those guys who airs all their dirty laundry. At the same time, I couldn't shake this feeling like I'd been thrown into a whole new life without any warning. I'd been with Claire for nearly a decade. We had routines, habits, little inside jokes that came from being together that long. And now, all of that was gone. It's weird how fast things change when you least expect it. You think you know what your life is, and then it's like the floor just drops out from under you. For the next few days, I laid low. I didn't tell many people what happened. I wasn't ready to deal with all the questions, and honestly, I didn't know how to explain it without feeling embarrassed. My family didn't know yet, and I wasn't sure how to bring it up. What do you even say? Hey, Mom, Dad, Claire's been cheating on me, and I walked out? It just felt too raw, and I wasn't ready to have that conversation. But Claire wasn't making things easy. Since I blocked her, she started reaching out to people we knew, our mutual friends, my family, even some of my coworkers. She was trying to find out where I was staying, trying to get them to talk me into meeting with her. She told them she needed closure or whatever. I don't know. That's when things started getting messy. Her friends began calling me, telling me how devastated she was, how she couldn't stop crying, how she was a wreck. They wanted me to meet up with her just so she could explain everything. I don't know what there was to explain. She cheated, I found out, and I left. End of story, right? But apparently that wasn't good enough for her. Her older sister Beth even called me, which was wild because Beth and I barely ever talked. She acted like this was all just some big misunderstanding and that I should give Claire a chance to explain herself. I wasn't having any of it, though. I told Beth straight up, she cheated on me. What's there to explain? She didn't have much to say after that. It didn't stop there, though. Claire's parents, who I'd always gotten along with, started reaching out too. They were shocked, obviously, and couldn't believe what was happening. But instead of supporting me, they sided with her. They tried to guilt trip me, saying things like, you know she loves you, and maybe you're overreacting. Overreacting? How was I supposed to react to being lied to and betrayed for weeks, maybe longer? That's when it hit me. No one really knew what was going on except me. To everyone else, we were the perfect couple, and Claire was this sweet, caring wife. They didn't see the lies, the cheating, the nights I stayed up wondering what the hell was going on. They saw the version of her she wanted them to see, I started feeling pretty alone at that point. My own family was supportive, sure, but Claire was really pulling at everyone's heartstrings. It was like they all forgot she was the one who destroyed our marriage. I knew I wasn't crazy, but damn, it felt like the world was upside down. But you know what? I wasn't about to give in. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into coming back. I'd seen who she really was, and there was no going back from that. No matter how many tears she shed or how many people she got to call me, I was done. Once the trust was broken, there was nothing left to fix. So, I stayed no contact with her. I blocked her on everything: phone, email, social media. If she wanted to reach out, she'd have to go through my lawyer. That's the only way I could keep my sanity. Every now and then, someone would send me a message saying how Claire was still struggling, that she wasn't handling things well, and that maybe I should meet up with her. They didn't get it. I wasn't interested in giving her any more of my time. She made her choice, and I made mine. As the days turned into weeks, I started to feel better. It was weird. Like I'd finally cut off this weight that had been dragging me down. I didn't feel angry anymore, just relieved. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into that mess. I had my own life to rebuild, and I wasn't about to let her ruin that too. So after all the craziness, it was time to actually start moving forward. It wasn't like flipping a switch and suddenly everything was okay, but I'd made up my mind that I wasn't going back. Claire had done enough damage, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down anymore. Blocking her on everything was the best decision I'd made. She couldn't reach me, couldn't send me guilt-tripping texts, couldn't cry to me over the phone. I finally had some space to breathe, and that's exactly what I needed. But just because I cut her off didn't mean life got easier right away. There was a ton of stuff to deal with. I mean, I still had to get through the legal stuff, figure out what to do with the house, and explain to people who kept asking what the hell happened between us. It was exhausting. One of the biggest things was figuring out what to do about the house. Technically, it was in both our names, but I didn't want to live there anymore. The place felt tainted, like every corner of it reminded me of the lies and the sneaking around. So I decided I wasn't going to keep it. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere that didn't come with all the baggage. I called a lawyer to start the divorce process officially. I had no idea what I was doing, but the lawyer walked me through everything. We'd have to split assets, figure out what was fair, all that. Claire hadn't responded yet, but I knew she'd come around once the papers hit her. I was preparing myself for whatever drama that would bring. On top of all that, I had to explain the situation to people who were still in the dark. My family, a few close friends who didn't know the details yet, they were all asking questions. When I finally told my parents, they were shocked. My mom was especially upset because she thought Claire was practically perfect. She couldn't believe that the woman who had been part of our family for almost 10 years had done something like this. I had to remind her that things aren't always what they seem. Then there were the friends. Most of them were on my side, but I still got the occasional, maybe you should talk to her, or, it's not too late to fix things. I wasn't having any of that. Fix what? She cheated, lied, and disrespected me. There was no fixing that. I wasn't about to entertain the idea of going back to someone who'd been unfaithful, no matter how many tears she shed or how many apologies she made. After a couple of weeks of just laying low and sorting through the mess, something weird happened. I started to feel better, lighter even. It was like once the dust settled and I stopped worrying about what everyone else thought, I realized how much weight I'd been carrying around. The trust issues, the constant wondering where she was or who she was with, that was all gone now. And yeah, I still had moments where it hit me that my marriage was over, but those moments didn't sting as much as they did at the beginning. One of the things that helped me move on was getting back into some of the hobbies I'd let slip during my marriage. Before all this, I used to love playing basketball with some buddies from work, but over the last year or so, I'd kind of let that go. So I hit them up and started joining them again at the local gym. It felt good to be doing something for myself again, something that wasn't tied to the stress of my relationship. I also focused on work. I know it sounds cliche, but diving into my job gave me a sense of purpose when everything else felt shaky. I wasn't going to let Claire's actions ruin every part of my life. I still had control over my career, and I poured my energy into that. And guess what? It paid off. I started getting recognition for some of the projects I'd been leading, and it felt like I was finally moving forward in a positive direction. Then, out of nowhere, I started hearing from people who hadn't been in touch for a while. Old friends who'd heard through the grapevine about the divorce reached out, checking in on me. Some of them had gone through similar situations, and it was kind of comforting to talk to people who understood what I was dealing with. I'm not saying misery loves company or anything, but it did help to know I wasn't the only one who had gone through something like this. Eventually, I started thinking about what was next for me. I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship or anything. I was still healing from everything that had happened. But I wasn't going to let Claire's betrayal make me give up on the idea of finding someone new someday. I mean, yeah, it was going to take time, but I wasn't about to let one bad experience ruin my whole outlook on relationships. People kept asking if I'd ever consider dating again, and my answer was always the same. Maybe one day, but not right now. I wasn't in a rush. I'd spent almost 10 years with Claire, and I wasn't about to rush into anything else just because I didn't want to be alone. I needed time to figure out who I was without her, and that was going to take more than a few weeks or even months. And honestly, the single life wasn't that bad. I had my freedom back. I could do what I wanted when I wanted, without having to check in with anyone or worry about what they were up to. It was a weird adjustment at first, but the more time went on, the more I realized how much I'd missed that freedom. Looking back, I know I made the right choice walking away from Claire. Sure, it hurt at first, and it was messy and complicated, but in the end, I wasn't going to stay in a marriage that was built on lies. I deserved better than that. Everyone does. No one should stay with someone who disrespects them like that. So, yeah, things were starting to look up. I wasn't exactly where I wanted to be yet, but I was getting there. Day by day, I was moving on, and that felt pretty damn good. I was starting to feel like I'd finally moved on, like things were finally leveling out. But of course, just when you think you've gotten some peace, life has a way of throwing something else at you. This time, it was Claire. I hadn't heard from her directly in a while, thanks to blocking her on everything, but that didn't mean she was completely gone from my life. One day, out of the blue, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I usually don't answer unknown numbers, but for some reason I picked this one up. And who was on the other line? Claire. She sounded nervous, which wasn't really surprising, considering everything. "Matt, I know I'm the last person you want to talk to," she started, and I was about to hang up right there. But something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to hear what she had to say. "I just need to talk to you, please," she said. I could hear her almost pleading. "I know I messed up, but there's something important we need to talk about." Now, this was the same Claire who had lied to my face for months, cheated, and tried to spin everything like it was some kind of misunderstanding. So naturally, I wasn't exactly rushing to hear her out. I told her, "Look, there's nothing left to say. We're done. You made your choices, and I made mine." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. I thought maybe she'd given up, but then she said, "I just need to meet with you, Matt. One last time, it's not about us. It's about something else." I didn't know what she meant by something else, but I wasn't about to get dragged back into her drama. "No," I said, keeping it short. "I'm not meeting you, Claire. We've got nothing left to talk about." Again, there was this long pause. She wasn't giving up, though. "Please, just hear me out. It's important." I was getting frustrated at this point. I wasn't interested in whatever new excuse she had cooked up. But just as I was about to hang up, she said something that caught me off guard. "It's about the house." The house? Now she had my attention. We hadn't finalized what to do with the house yet, and if she had something to say about that, I figured it was worth hearing. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice cold. "Say what you need to say." She sighed like she was relieved that I hadn't hung up. "I've been thinking about the house," she started, "and I don't think it makes sense for us to hold on to it anymore. I want to sell it." That was the last thing I expected. I thought she'd want to fight over the house or make it more complicated. But selling it? That actually made sense. Still, I wasn't about to jump into any agreements without thinking it through. "Okay," I said cautiously. "We'll talk through the lawyers. No need for us to meet." I could hear her disappointment through the phone, but I didn't care. This was business now, not personal, and I wasn't going to let her pull me back into anything more than that. I ended the call, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. At least this wasn't some new emotional plea from her. But still, hearing her voice brought back a lot of stuff I wasn't really ready to deal with. The house, though, selling it? That might actually be the final piece to moving on for good.
Layla gripped the steering wheel tightly, her breath catching as the officer's voice rang out through her car window. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded, his tone as sharp as the glare of the patrol car's flashing lights behind her. Her heart pounded against her chest. How could she explain that she physically couldn't comply? The air inside the car felt suffocating as panic started to take hold. The day had started so peacefully, with Layla savoring her morning coffee and a quiet sense of accomplishment as she prepared for a simple meetup with friends. Driving had become a symbol of her independence, a victory over the accident that had changed her life forever. But now, parked on the side of the road, her sanctuary was under siege. The officer's towering presence outside her window shattered her sense of safety. This wasn't just a routine stop, it was a confrontation with assumptions, power, and prejudice. As the officer leaned closer, his words cutting like a blade, Layla's resolve stiffened. She wasn't just a disabled woman trapped in a car, she was a fighter who had rebuilt her life brick by brick. What happened next, however, would leave both of them, and everyone watching, forever changed. Welcome to Real Life Stories New, where narratives like these challenge your perspective and uncover the resilience of the human spirit. Watch as Layla's courage takes center stage in a battle that is far more than a traffic stop. Will she rise against the odds, or will this day rewrite her journey forever? Layla's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her mind racing as the officer's voice echoed in her ears. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, his tone cold and unyielding. She glanced at her prosthetic legs, an unspoken reminder of her reality, and took a steadying breath. This wasn't just fear. It was humiliation, bubbling beneath the surface and threatening to spill over. "Officer, I physically can't step out," she said, her voice calm but firm. Her stomach tightened as she searched his face for any sign of understanding, but his expression remained stony. Instead, he leaned closer, his shadow darkening the interior of her car. "I said get out," he barked, his hand brushing the edge of the door handle. Layla's chest tightened. She felt cornered, every inch of her autonomy slipping away under his oppressive gaze. The vulnerability she fought so hard to conceal was now laid bare. Would this man even care if she told him about the years of grit and resilience it took to regain her independence? "I can't comply with your orders," she repeated, her voice shaking now but resolute. "I don't have the ability to stand." Her words hung in the air, fragile yet defiant. For a moment, she thought she saw hesitation flicker in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Without another word, he yanked the door open, the sound of the latch releasing like a gunshot in her ears. Before she could process what was happening, his hand clamped around her arm, and he began pulling her forward. "Let me go!" Layla cried, her voice breaking as panic set in. Her prosthetics shifted awkwardly, one twisting out of place, the metal frame clattering against the pavement. The sound was deafening, a cruel reminder of her reality. Around them, murmurs began to ripple through a growing crowd. "She can't even walk," someone shouted, their voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. Layla's breath hitched as she caught sight of people raising their phones, cameras trained on the unfolding scene. It was no longer just her fight. Strangers now bore witness to her struggle, and their presence brought a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. The officer's grip tightened, his frustration boiling over. "You think you're above the law?" he hissed, his voice dripping with disdain. "I don't care what excuses you have. Get out now, or I'll assist you further." Her mind raced. She could either give in, let herself be dragged completely into his control, or she could resist, not physically, but through the only weapon she had left, her voice. "I told you, I can't," she shouted, her desperation echoing louder now. The sting of tears blurred her vision, but she refused to break. "What you're doing is wrong. And you will be held accountable." His hand hovered near his holster, his posture taut and threatening. Layla's pulse quickened as the officer made his intentions clear. This wasn't just about compliance anymore, it was about dominance, about stripping her of her dignity. And then, just as the situation threatened to spiral further out of control, a new voice broke through the tension. "Step back." The younger officer's tone was commanding, yet measured. Derek, she thought his name was. He moved toward them, his tall frame intercepting the escalating scene. "You're escalating a situation that doesn't need to be. Let her go." The first officer turned sharply, his face twisting with indignation. "This is none of your business," he spat. "She's resisting, and I'm handling it." "She's not resisting," Derek countered, his voice calm but firm. He gestured toward the crowd. And you're not just handling this anymore. The whole world is watching. The tension between the two men crackled like electricity. Layla could only watch, her breaths shallow, as Derek subtly positioned himself closer to her, his body language protective. You need to step down, now, Derek said, his tone leaving no room for argument. For the first time, the first officer faltered, his eyes darting toward the phones held aloft by the crowd. His face hardened as he turned his glare back toward Layla. This isn't over, he muttered, venom dripping from his words. But he released her arm, stepping away as Derek stood his ground. Layla's entire body felt like it was vibrating with adrenaline. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. As Derek turned to her, his expression softened, though there was a quiet fire in his eyes. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low, almost gentle. Layla swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. I'm not hurt, she said, her voice trembling, but I'm not okay with what just happened. Derek nodded, his jaw tightening. And you shouldn't be. None of this was right. Around them, the crowd murmured in support, their voices blending into a wave of solidarity. For the first time since the ordeal began, Layla felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected, hope. As sirens blared in the distance, signaling the arrival of more officers, she looked Derek in the eyes and said with quiet determination, this isn't just about me. This has to stop. I know, he replied, his gaze steady. And I'm going to help make sure it does. For the first time, Layla felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Layla stood outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the pavement. She glanced at the crowd gathered around her, their cheers and signs a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped her only hours ago. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of closure, not because everything was resolved, but because she had faced her fears and spoken her truth. Inside the courtroom, she had found her voice. It wasn't just about her story but about the broader fight for dignity and justice. The moment she looked into the eyes of those who came to support her, Derek, Vanessa, strangers who believed in her cause, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing tall, even if not on her own legs, and that made all the difference. Layla took a deep breath, her prosthetic legs steady beneath her as she wheeled herself through the sea of supporters. Her determination had grown into something greater, a commitment to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She was no longer just a victim, she was a symbol of resilience, a voice for change. As the crowd began to disperse, a young girl in a wheelchair rolled up to Layla. You're so brave, she said softly, her eyes wide with admiration. Layla smiled, her heart swelling. And so are you, she replied, reaching out to take the girl's hand. Moments like this reminded her why the fight mattered. It wasn't just for justice but for hope, for a world where no one felt invisible or powerless. If this story moved you, please like, share, and help Real Life Stories New reach 10,000 subscribers. Together, we can shine a light on stories that inspire and change lives.
Dad and stepmom find out they have a year left to force me split my late mom's money with their kids, so they make my life miserable, and I did this. Alright, so here's the deal. I'm Alex, 17 now, and I'm not just any regular teenager. My story's a bit, well, let's just say different from most. It all starts with my mom, who died when I was 7. That was tough, of course, but little did I know back then she left me something big. Like, really big. But we'll get into that soon. Now, my dad remarried when I was about 9 to Rachel, who came with her daughter Madison. Rachel's alright, I guess, but she's definitely the type who tries too hard to act like she's everyone's best friend. And Madison? She's like a year younger than me, and let's just say we don't exactly click. Not that she's done anything majorly wrong, it's just she's always had that I deserve it all vibe. Oh, and I have a half-brother Jake, who's 5 now. He's cool, just a little kid, so no drama there. Yet. But let's rewind to last year when I found out about the money. See, my grandparents, who are my mom's parents, sat me down for a serious talk. I thought it was going to be about college or maybe some boring life advice or whatever, but nope. They dropped the biggest bomb on me. Turns out I'm going to inherit between $500,000 to $1 million when I turn 18. Yeah, you read that right. My grandparents were super successful business people. They ran this business for years, made a ton of money, and sold it. Instead of keeping any for themselves, they put it all into this trust fund for me. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't jumping up and down when they told me. I mean, my mom died, and money's not exactly something that can replace that. But still, the idea of having that kind of cash was pretty wild to think about. Like, 1 minute, you're just a regular teenager with part-time job dreams, and the next, you're going to be set for life. Kind of a lot to process. My mom had this whole plan set up before she passed. She wanted to make sure that if anything happened to her, I'd be taken care of. She didn't want my dad, or worse, his new wife and kids, getting their hands on it. My grandparents kept adding to the fund after she was gone, and they've been managing it ever since. Smart, right? They even made sure that my dad had no clue about how much was actually in the account. Fast forward to last year, and my grandparents figured it was time I knew the truth. They wanted me to be prepared, not just hit 18 and suddenly have all this money with no clue what to do with it. They explained that my mom set this up to secure my future, and only mine. Not for Madison, not for Jake, and certainly not for Rachel. Just me. At first, I didn't really think much about telling my dad. I figured he already knew it was a decent amount and would be cool with it. Big mistake. One night, while we were just sitting around, I casually mentioned that I'd be getting a good chunk of money when I turned 18. My dad's face went from chill to complete shock. Like the color drained out of his face and his jaw just kind of hung there. I guess he didn't expect me to be sitting on a gold mine. He started asking all these questions like, how much, where's it from, who's in charge of it, all that stuff. And, I didn't want to lie or anything, so I told him. Well, next thing I know, he's talking to Rachel about it, and things went south fast. I mean, they sat me down like we were having some kind of intervention. They start talking about family and sharing the wealth, and how Madison has big dreams of going to law school, but won't be able to afford it unless she gets some help. And by help, they meant my money. Not only that, but they also brought up Jake like, oh, he's only 5 now, but what about when he needs to go to college? It would be so great if you could help set him up for his future. I sat there in disbelief. I mean, are you kidding me? This money was saved by my mom and my grandparents, and they expect me to just hand it over because they can't figure out how to pay for their own kids' stuff? I told them straight up, this money is mine. My mom and my grandparents made sure it's for me, not for Madison or Jake. And that's when Rachel flipped. She went on this whole rant about how I'm being selfish and how it's not fair to keep that kind of money all to myself when I have 2 siblings who could really use it to better their lives. My dad was nodding along like she was making the most logical argument in the world, and I just couldn't believe it. They were acting like I owed them something. Rachel kept pushing, saying things like, how could you even think of blowing all that money on yourself when you could change someone else's life? Don't you care about your family? But let me tell you, it was never about family for them. It was all about getting their hands on the cash. I stood my ground, though. I told them that I wasn't going to share it, and if they were upset about that, then so be it. They both looked at me like I just slapped them in the face. My dad tried to reason with me, saying things like, I'm not asking you to give all of it, just a portion. Think about how much this could help us out. But again, us? No, this money isn't our money, it's mine. After that, the mood in the house changed. My dad and Rachel didn't talk to me much for a while. They kept their distance, but I could tell they were stewing over it. I overheard Rachel talking to Madison one night, telling her not to worry, that they'd figure something out. I couldn't help but feel like they were planning something behind my back. The thing is, I'm not stupid. I know they're just biding their time, waiting for me to crack, or maybe hoping they can guilt trip me into giving them something. But they don't understand that my mom set this up for a reason. She knew this might happen, and that's why she made sure the money stayed locked down until I'm 18. And honestly, I'm not backing down. This is about more than just money. It's about my mom's legacy, what she wanted for me, and not letting anyone take that away. Not Rachel, not Madison, not even my dad. They can try all they want, but they're not getting a penny. All right, so after the whole money thing blew up, things at home got even weirder. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you can feel people talking about you behind your back, but it was like that. My dad and Rachel were acting super off, and Madison wasn't helping either. Like, every time I walked into the room, it would go dead silent. They'd just stare at me, like I was some kind of villain for not handing over my inheritance. It was awkward as hell. Anyway, one day, Rachel decided to take things up a notch. She pulled me aside in the kitchen and tried to have this heart-to-heart conversation. I was just trying to make a sandwich and she comes at me with, "Alex, I think you're making a mistake. You're young and you don't understand the value of family yet. When you get older, you'll see that helping out your siblings is more important than any amount of money." I just looked at her and said, "They're not my siblings. Madison isn't even blood related and Jake's my half-brother. This money has nothing to do with them." She looked shocked, like I just insulted her entire existence. But come on, was I supposed to just roll over and agree with her guilt trip? Rachel wasn't done, though. She tried to go on about how family isn't just about blood, and how I should show compassion, but I wasn't buying any of it. It was the same old routine, make me feel bad, get me to agree to give them money, and everyone's happy. Except me, of course. Things hit a real turning point about a week later. My dad and I had this huge blow-up argument, and honestly, I didn't see it coming. He had been pretty quiet after the initial conversation, so I thought maybe he'd let it go. I was wrong. One night, he comes home from work, and I can already tell something's up. He's all tense and doesn't even bother with the usual, "How was your day?" small talk. Instead, he just says, "We need to talk," in that serious dad voice that makes you feel like you're about to get grounded or something. So, we sit down in the living room, and he starts off slow, like he's trying to be reasonable. He's like, "Alex, I know you're young, and you might not fully understand what you're doing with this money. I'm not saying you have to give all of it away, but Madison really needs help for college. And Jake, well, he's got a future ahead of him too. You could do something great for them." I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but I kept my cool, mostly. I told him, "Dad, this isn't my responsibility. You and Rachel need to figure out how to pay for Madison's college and Jake's future. That's on you, not me." And then he snapped. Like full-on snapped. He started yelling, which is something my dad never does. He said, "I've done everything for you. I've raised you, put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you, and this is how you repay me? By being selfish?" I tried to stay calm, but it was hard. I mean, come on. He was basically saying that I owed him my inheritance because he did the bare minimum of being a parent. I told him, "This money is from Mom and my grandparents. They set it up for me. You don't get to tell me what to do with it." That's when he said the thing that really messed with my head. He goes, "Your mom wouldn't have wanted you to turn your back on your family like this. She would have wanted you to share." That hit hard, but I knew it wasn't true. My mom set up that money specifically so I wouldn't have to deal with this kind of pressure. She knew something like this could happen, and she didn't want my dad or anyone else taking advantage of it. So I said, if Mom wanted me to share, she would have set it up that way, but she didn't. She left it for me. After that argument, my dad didn't talk to me for days. Rachel wasn't talking to me either, but that wasn't anything new. The house felt like one big, cold shoulder. I would come home from school, and they'd be in the living room or kitchen, but they wouldn't say a word to me. If I tried to talk to them, they'd just give me one-word answers, or ignore me completely. Madison, on the other hand, took a different approach. She wasn't quiet at all. In fact, she got kind of bold about the whole thing. One day, I overheard her talking to Rachel in her room, and she was like, "I don't get why he won't just give me the money. It's not like he's going to use all of it. He could at least help me out with tuition." It was almost funny how entitled she sounded, like it was just a given that she should get some of my inheritance. I wanted to bust in and say, "Hey, newsflash, it's not your money." But I didn't. I just let it go because arguing with her wouldn't get me anywhere. A few days later, things got even crazier. Rachel decided to bring in a lawyer. Yeah, you heard that right. A lawyer. She claimed that she just wanted to explore all the options and make sure everything was being handled fairly. I knew right away that this was her way of trying to intimidate me into giving up some of the money. The lawyer came over to the house, and Rachel made a big show of it, like it was some important meeting. My dad was there too, but he stayed quiet, letting Rachel do most of the talking. She kept saying things like, "We just want to make sure Alex understands the legal side of things, and we're concerned about how this money is being distributed." The lawyer, though, didn't seem all that interested. He basically told them that there wasn't much they could do because the money was in a trust set up by my mom and grandparents. It was airtight, and the only way to change anything would be if I decided to do it. Rachel looked pissed. I could tell she was hoping for a different answer, but the lawyer shut her down pretty quick. After that, Rachel stopped pretending to be nice. She stopped talking to me altogether. She wouldn't even look at me when I walked into the room. It was like I didn't exist anymore. And honestly, I didn't care. If she was going to be like that, I was fine with it. The less I had to deal with her, the better. At this point, I knew things weren't going to get better. My 18th birthday was just a few months away, and I could feel the tension building up. It was like everyone was waiting for that moment when the money would officially be mine, hoping I'd change my mind. But I wasn't going to. There was no way I was giving in. I started spending more time at my grandparents' place just to get away from the craziness at home. They were really supportive, and my grandpa even joked about putting a restraining order on my dad and Rachel if they kept this nonsense up. It felt good to know they had my back, no matter what. But deep down, I knew that once I turned 18, things were going to get a lot worse. All right, so now we're getting close to my 18th birthday, and let me tell you, things were going from bad to worse. If I thought my dad and Rachel were being weird before, they took it to a whole new level as the big day got closer. It was like they were just waiting for me to slip up or magically change my mind about the money. Spoiler. I wasn't going to. It started with my dad trying to get all friendly again. Like, after weeks of giving me the cold shoulder, he suddenly acted like everything was fine. One morning, he's sitting at the kitchen table sipping coffee, and he goes, "Hey, Alex, I was thinking we should go fishing this weekend. Just the two of us. You know, like old times." Now, fishing was something we used to do back when I was younger, but it's been years since we actually did anything like that. So it was a pretty random offer, especially since he hadn't exactly been chatty with me recently. I just said, maybe. I've got a lot going on with school. I wasn't going to just fall for the whole let's be buddies again thing after everything he pulled. He didn't push it, but I could tell he was disappointed. Honestly, it felt like he was trying to butter me up so I'd be more open to giving away some of my inheritance. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what this was really about. While my dad was trying the whole nice guy routine, Rachel was up to something else entirely. One day, I came home from school and she's in the living room with a bunch of paperwork spread out on the coffee table. I didn't think much of it at first. She's always got her nose in some paperwork. But then I saw one of the papers had my name on it. I asked her, "What's all this?" And she looked up with this fake smile, like she was trying so hard to be friendly. "Oh, just going over some legal stuff," she said casually. "We want to make sure everything's in order for when you turn 18. Now, I knew Rachel worked in finance or something like that, but this was different. It wasn't just regular paperwork, it was about me and my money. I didn't say anything at the moment, but I made a mental note to keep an eye on her. Something about it didn't sit right with me. A few days later, everything came to a head. My dad sat me down again, this time with Rachel right there, and they hit me with it. "Alex," my dad started, "we've been thinking, and we really believe that once you have access to the money, you should consider helping out Madison with her college costs." I knew this was coming, but it still pissed me off. I just looked at him and said, "Dad, we've been over this. That money isn't for her. It's for me. Mom and my grandparents set it up specifically for me, and I'm not giving it away." Rachel, of course, jumped in with her guilt trip tactics. "But Alex, you're going to have so much money. More than you'll ever need. Madison's worked so hard, and she deserves a chance at a good future. You could help make that happen for her." I had to bite my tongue. It wasn't that I didn't care about Madison wanting to go to college or whatever, but this was my future we were talking about. And honestly, it wasn't my job to pay for her life. "I get that," I said, trying to stay calm. "But it's not my responsibility. If you and Dad want to help her, then you should figure that out. But I'm not giving away my inheritance." That's when Rachel got really mad. She stood up and started pacing around the room, throwing her hands in the air like she couldn't believe what I was saying. "This is ridiculous," she yelled. "You're sitting on a fortune, and you're just going to hoard it all for yourself? What kind of person does that?" I didn't even have a chance to respond before my dad jumped in too. "She's right, Alex. You need to think about your family. We've all made sacrifices for you, and this is how you repay us?" That was it. I'd had enough. I stood up and said, "Sacrifices? What sacrifices? I've been living in this house, going to school, doing my own thing. I haven't asked you for anything. And now because I'm finally getting something for myself, you think I owe it to you?" They were both stunned. I could see it in their faces. They didn't expect me to push back so hard, but I was done being pushed around. A few days after that fight, I got a call from my mom's lawyer. He told me that my dad had been in touch with him, asking about the details of the trust fund. Apparently, he wanted to see if there was any way to challenge the way it was set up. When I heard that, I felt my blood boil. My dad wasn't just trying to guilt me into giving up the money. He was actually trying to find a way to force me to do it. I called my grandpa right away and told him everything. He wasn't happy, to say the least. "Don't worry, Alex," he said. "We've got everything locked down tight. Your dad can't touch a penny of that money, and neither can Rachel." That made me feel a little better, but I still couldn't believe my dad would go that far. It wasn't even about the money at this point. It was about the principle. This was supposed to be for my future, something my mom wanted for me, and here was my dad, trying to take that away just because he and Rachel couldn't get their finances together. Things got even crazier as my birthday got closer. Rachel started being even colder toward me, barely acknowledging my existence whenever I was around. Madison, too. It was like I wasn't part of the family anymore. Every conversation was short and awkward, like they were just waiting for me to turn 18 so they could make one last push for the money. But the final straw came about a week before my birthday. My dad came to me again, this time without Rachel. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping, and I could tell he was about to make some kind of big ask. "Alex," he said, "I know things have been tense around here, and I just want to clear the air. I've been thinking a lot about this money situation, and I get that it's yours. I really do. But before you make any final decisions, I just want to ask one last thing." I already knew what was coming, but I let him continue. "Madison's future depends on this, Alex. If you could just spare a little bit, enough to cover her first year of college, it would mean the world to her. To all of us." I couldn't believe it. After everything, he was still trying to get me to crack. But this time, I didn't even hesitate. "No, Dad, I'm not doing it. You and Rachel need to figure this out on your own. I'm not responsible for Madison's college or Jake's future or anything else. This money is for me, and I'm not giving it away." He didn't say anything for a while. He just sat there, staring at the floor, like he didn't know what to do next. Finally, he nodded and said, "Okay, I get it." And that was it. He walked out of the room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I knew the worst was still to come, but at least I'd stood my ground. Update 1. So here we are. My 18th birthday was just around the corner, and it felt like I was counting down the days to some big showdown. Every day at home got more uncomfortable. You know that feeling when you can't relax in your own space because everyone around you is walking on eggshells? Yeah, that was my life. Rachel, for one, had completely given up on even pretending to like me. She wouldn't talk to me unless she had to, and even then, it was always cold and short. Madison? Well, she'd been giving me these side-eye looks every time we crossed paths, like I was the bad guy in all of this for not just handing over the money. And my dad? He was still distant, but I could tell he was stressed out. I think deep down, he knew he'd lost the battle, but that didn't make things any easier. The weird thing was, in the week leading up to my birthday, it was almost too quiet. My dad and Rachel weren't pushing the money issue as much anymore. And I started thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd accepted my decision. I should have known better. A few days before my birthday, I was out with some friends from school, trying to just live my life and not think about the mess at home. When I got back, the house was completely empty, which was weird because Rachel was usually home with Jake. I figured maybe they went out for the day or something, so I didn't think much of it. But then I saw a letter on the kitchen table with my name on it. Now, I'm not one for drama, but my stomach dropped as soon as I saw that envelope. I knew something was up. I opened it, and inside was a note from my dad. It wasn't long, but it hit hard. "Alex, I know we haven't been seeing eye to eye lately, but I want you to know that everything I've done has been for the family. I hope you'll reconsider your decision before it's too late. Rachel and I have discussed things, and if you're not willing to contribute to helping out your siblings, then maybe it's time you think about where you really want to live. Love, Dad." I was fuming. Basically, he was telling me that if I didn't give up some of the money, I wasn't welcome in the house anymore. I couldn't believe it. After everything, he was still using guilt to try and manipulate me into giving up my inheritance. That night, I decided I wasn't going to just sit back and let this happen. I waited until everyone was home: Dad, Rachel, Madison, and even little Jake. We were all sitting in the living room, and the tension was thick. No one was really talking, but I could feel that everyone knew what was coming. I looked at my dad and just said it. "So, I found your letter." He didn't look surprised. He just nodded like he knew this conversation was coming. Rachel, on the other hand, gave me this smug look, like she thought they'd finally broken me down. "So, what's the deal, Dad? You're really going to kick me out if I don't give up some of my money?" He sighed, rubbing his temples like he was the one having the tough time. "Alex, it's not about kicking you out. It's about being part of this family. You have to understand that this money could help all of us." I wasn't having it. Help all of us? Or help you and Rachel not have to worry about Madison's college bills? Let's be real here. You're not doing this for me. You're doing this because you see my inheritance as a way out of your problems. Rachel jumped in, of course. "That's not true, Alex. We've always wanted what's best for you, but you have a chance to help your brother and sister." "They're not my responsibility." I cut her off, louder than I meant to. I could see Jake flinch a little, which made me feel bad for raising my voice, but I couldn't back down now. "This money was set aside for me. Mom made sure of that. You can't just act like I owe you because you've got two other kids to worry about. Madison finally spoke up, her voice full of attitude. You're being selfish, Alex. It's not like you'll even need all that money. Why can't you just help out? I turned to her, trying to keep calm but not really succeeding. You're not entitled to my money, Madison. None of you are. I don't care how hard you've worked or what dreams you have. This is my future, and I'm not letting you or anyone else take it from me. The room went silent. My dad looked like he was about to say something, but he just stared at the floor, shaking his head. Rachel, though, wasn't done. If you can't see how much you're hurting this family, then maybe your dad was right. Maybe it's time you find somewhere else to live. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own stepmom was basically telling me to get out because I wouldn't hand over money that wasn't even hers to begin with. I looked at my dad, hoping he'd step in, but he just sat there, not saying a word. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end well. They weren't going to stop. No matter how many times I said no, they were going to keep pushing until they got what they wanted, or until I was out of the picture. I stood up, not really knowing what to say next. My mind was racing, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to yell, to tell them all to screw off, but another part of me just felt tired. Tired of all the fighting, tired of the guilt trips, tired of feeling like I was the bad guy in my own home. I looked at my dad one last time. So, this is it? You're really going to throw me out because I won't give you the money? He didn't look up. He just muttered, I don't want to do this, Alex, but you're not leaving us much of a choice. That was it. I was done. Fine, I said, my voice shaking a little. I'll go. But don't expect me to come back. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out. I didn't even pack up my things right then. I just left. I called my grandparents on the way to their house, told them what happened, and they were beyond pissed. They told me I could stay with them as long as I needed, which was a huge relief. But as I walked away from the house, I couldn't help but feel this weird mix of anger and sadness. It hurt that my own dad would choose money over me, but at the same time I knew I couldn't keep living like that. I had to look out for myself, even if it meant leaving my family behind. The next few days were kind of a blur. I moved most of my stuff to my grandparents' house, and they were super supportive, telling me over and over that I did the right thing. But it was still hard. Even though my dad had basically kicked me out, it didn't change the fact that I'd lost a big part of my life. It felt like a weird kind of betrayal, and I wasn't sure how to deal with it. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to give up my future for them. I wasn't going to let their greed control me. And now, with my birthday just days away, it felt like everything was about to change. Update 2. So, my 18th birthday finally rolled around. I gotta say, it didn't feel like I thought it would. I guess I'd always pictured it as this huge milestone, like I'd wake up and everything would be different, you know? But in reality, it just felt like another day, except now I had access to a ridiculous amount of money. I was staying with my grandparents by then, so I woke up in their guest room, and the first thing I saw was my grandpa sitting at the kitchen table with a huge grin on his face. He had the papers all ready for me to sign, giving me full control of the trust. My grandma was making breakfast, and it almost felt normal for a minute. Like, after everything that went down with my dad and Rachel, maybe things were finally looking up. But of course, nothing in my life is ever that simple. I barely had time to eat before my phone started buzzing. I checked the screen, and of course, it was my dad. I hadn't spoken to him since I left, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to. But it was my birthday, and a small part of me wondered if maybe he was calling to make things right. Maybe he realized how screwed up everything had gotten, and he was ready to apologize. Spoiler, he wasn't. I answered the phone, and before I could even say hello, he jumped right in with, Alex, we need to talk. It's important. Great, not even a happy birthday first. I sighed and said, What's up, Dad? He didn't waste any time. Rachel and I have been thinking, and we really think you should reconsider your decision about the money. We understand that you feel like it's yours, but you have to understand that this affects the whole family. I couldn't believe it. Here we go again. Dad, we've been over this. I'm not giving you or Rachel any of the money. It's mine, and that's final. He didn't even acknowledge what I said. Instead, he just kept talking, like I hadn't said anything at all. Look, Alex, I know this is a big moment for you, but you need to be smart about it. You don't want to burn bridges with your family over money. I clenched my jaw, trying not to lose it. Dad, you kicked me out because I wouldn't give you the money. That wasn't me burning bridges. That was you. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and I could hear him breathing heavily, like he was trying to control himself. I didn't kick you out. You chose to leave. I almost laughed. You told me to figure out where I wanted to live if I wasn't going to share the money. What else was I supposed to do? He paused again, then finally said, Look, this doesn't have to be a big fight. We can work something out. Maybe just help Madison with her first year of college and we can all move past this. I'd had enough. I couldn't take it anymore. Dad, I'm done. I'm done with all of this. You're not getting any money, and if you can't accept that, then we don't have anything else to talk about. Before he could say anything else, I hung up. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I was going to explode. This was supposed to be my day, but of course he had to ruin it by dragging me back into the same argument we'd been having for months. After that call, I realized I couldn't keep living in this weird limbo where I was waiting for things to get better with my dad. It was clear that to him and Rachel, the money was more important than anything else, and if they couldn't see that, then there was no point in holding out hope that things would ever be normal again. I sat down with my grandparents and told them everything. They'd been really supportive throughout the whole mess, but I could tell they were worried about how things were going to play out now that I had control of the money. My grandpa, always the practical one, said, Alex, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about your relationship with your dad. You need to decide if you're willing to cut ties or if you're going to try and work things out. I knew he was right. I'd been avoiding the real issue, hoping that once the money was officially mine, everything would just magically resolve itself. But that wasn't going to happen, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to give my dad or Rachel any money, no matter what. But I also wasn't going to keep putting myself through the emotional ringer, waiting for them to come around. I needed to move on with my life, and if that meant cutting them out, then so be it. A few days after my birthday, I got another call, this time from Madison. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of me. I hadn't heard from her directly since everything went down, and I was kind of wondering what she had to say. When I picked up, she was surprisingly calm. No attitude, no guilt trips. She just said, Hey Alex, can we talk? I was cautious, but said, Sure, what's up? She sighed. Look, I know things have been rough between us lately, and I get that you don't want to give me any money. I'm not here to argue with you about that. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for how things turned out. I wasn't expecting that. At all. Thanks, I guess. There was a pause, and then she said, I never wanted things to get this bad. I know I was being entitled, and that wasn't fair to you. I don't know. I guess I was desperate because college is expensive, and I thought maybe you'd help me out. But I get it now. It's your money, and you don't owe me anything. I didn't really know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her off, but another part of me appreciated that she was at least acknowledging how screwed up things had gotten. Thanks for saying that, I finally said. But you're right. This whole situation sucks, and I wish it hadn't gone down this way. But it is what it is. Madison sighed again. Yeah, I know. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. I'm still pissed, but I guess I'll figure something out for college. We didn't talk much after that, but it felt like some kind of closure. It didn't fix anything, but at least she wasn't trying to guilt me into giving her money anymore. After that, things got a lot quieter. My dad stopped calling, and Rachel, well, I wasn't going to hear from her anytime soon. I stayed with my grandparents for a while, and they helped me set up a plan for how to manage the money responsibly. I didn't want to blow through it all or make dumb decisions, so I set up a meeting with a financial advisor and got everything sorted. It felt weird, though. I mean, I was 18, and I had more money than most people make in their entire lives. But it didn't feel like some huge victory. It felt like I'd lost something important in the process, my relationship with my dad. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't keep letting him and Rachel push me around. I started making plans for my future. College, maybe starting a business, who knows? For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my life, and it was a pretty damn good feeling. And as for my dad, I don't know if we'll ever fix things, but I do know one thing. I'm not letting anyone take away what my mom and grandparents worked so hard to give me. This is my life now, and I'm going to live it on my terms. Worked hard to give her the dream wedding, then she cheated and took everything. But I got my revenge. All right, so here it goes. I still can't really wrap my head around what just happened, but I guess talking about it might help a little. So yeah, I was with Maya for 6 years. 6 years. We were solid, at least I thought we were. I mean, we had some rough patches. But who doesn't, right? We'd been together long enough to start talking about getting married, and she'd always dreamed about this perfect wedding. Like the whole 9 yards, the big white dress, the fancy venue, tons of guests, all that. I loved her, so I was willing to bust my ass to make that happen. I was working these crazy hours, 12-hour shifts, and saving up every penny for the wedding. We even had a joint account set up specifically for that. We both put money into it over the years, but honestly, most of the deposits were from me. I'm not saying that to be petty, just being real. Anyway, things seemed fine until a couple months ago. So here's where things start to get F asterisk asterisk ket up. Out of nowhere, Maya gets hooked on this stupid mobile game. You know, one of those rhythm ones where you tap to some music and your character dances. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, I wasn't into it, but it wasn't hurting anyone, right? She'd play it after work and sometimes would stay up late doing it, but whatever, people unwind in different ways. Or at least that's what I thought. Then out of nowhere, she starts talking about this guy, Aaron, she met on the game. She tells me they've been chatting on the game's message board or whatever, and I'm like, okay, cool, she's making a friend. But as time went on, I started noticing she was spending more and more time on her phone talking to this dude and less time with me. I didn't want to be that guy, you know, the jealous boyfriend, but it just felt weird. Fast forward a few weeks, and one day she comes to me, completely serious, and says she's found a connection with this guy that we supposedly never had. I'll never forget the way she said it, like, what the hell? We've been together 6 years, and she's saying she's got a better connection with some guy she's never met in person. Someone she met through a freaking game? I tried to keep my cool and just asked her straight up what she meant by that. She said she had this chemistry with Aaron that she hadn't felt with me for a long time. You can imagine how that hit me. Like, I've been working my ass off, saving up, putting in overtime for our wedding, and suddenly she's telling me some random dude in an online game is her soulmate or whatever. I asked her if she was serious, and she said yeah. That's when I knew things were about to go downhill fast. So fast forward again. I'm working in a city far from home, still grinding out those 12-hour shifts because, you know, I still had hope at this point that we'd work things out. Maybe she was going through something, right? I wanted to believe that we could fix it. But then one night, after a long day at work, I go to check the joint account. And guess what? All the money's gone. I'm talking every last cent. Now, this is the part where my stomach dropped. That account had nearly $6,000 in it. $6,000 that I'd been saving for the wedding, and it was all gone. I knew it was her. Who else could have done it? I just sat there staring at the screen, trying to figure out if this was real. Maybe it was some mistake, or maybe she needed the money for something urgent and forgot to tell me. But I knew better. I knew this was her way of saying she was done with me, done with the wedding, and done with everything we had built together. I called her right away. She didn't pick up the first few times, but I kept calling. When she finally answered, I asked her what the hell was going on. She didn't even sound sorry. She just said she needed the money, and that since it was a joint account, she had the right to take it. No apology, no explanation, nothing. Just straight up said she took it because she could. I don't know if you've ever felt this before, but in that moment, I was completely numb. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just hang up. I asked her if this was about Aaron, and she said yeah, that she was planning on starting fresh. She was going to meet up with him in person and see where things go from there. I couldn't even process it. She was leaving me, someone she'd been with for 6 years, for some guy she only knew through a F asterisk asterisk King mobile game. I tried to get her to explain more, but she just said it wasn't working between us anymore, and that she needed something new. New? Really? We've been together for years, built a whole life together, and she throws it all away for something new. It felt like my entire world just collapsed in that moment. I hung up, and that's when it really hit me. She was gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. I went back to check the joint account details again, just to be sure. Yep, it was wiped clean. But here's the kicker. She took everything from our wedding fund, even though 80% of it was my money. And legally, I couldn't do anything about it because it was a joint account, and both of us had equal rights to it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was stuck in a city miles away from home, working a job I hated, and all for a wedding that was never going to happen. I kept replaying everything in my head, how we got to this point, where things went wrong. I had been doing everything I could to give her the life she wanted, and she just walked away like it meant nothing. The worst part? I still loved her. As much as it hurt, part of me still wanted to believe we could work it out. Maybe this was just a phase, right? Maybe she'd realize she was making a mistake and come back. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. She was already gone. After that night, I decided to call her dad, Mark. I wasn't sure if it was the right move, but I had to do something. I wasn't going to let her get away with draining the account like that. Mark's a decent guy, and we've always gotten along, so I figured he'd at least hear me out. When I told him what happened, he was pissed. Like I could hear it in his voice. He couldn't believe it either. He asked for my bank statements to see how much of the money was actually mine, and he said he'd talk to her and figure out a way to pay me back. I hung up the phone, feeling a little better knowing someone was on my side, but I knew the real fight was yet to come. So after talking to Mark, I was trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. Like, my mind was all over the place. It wasn't just about the money, though yeah, losing that much cash stung like hell, but it was more about realizing that Maya wasn't the person I thought she was. It's like everything I thought I knew about her just got flipped upside down, and I was left there trying to pick up the pieces of what was left of my life. The next day, Mark called me again and said he had a plan to get me my money back. He didn't go into too much detail on the phone, just said we needed to have a sit-down with Maya and her parents. He'd already talked to Diane, Maya's mom, and they wanted to settle everything properly. I didn't want to do it, honestly. I wasn't ready to see Maya again, not after the S***T she pulled, but I also knew I needed to get my money back and figure out where we stood. I wasn't going to keep playing this game of pretending things were fine when they clearly weren't. So I agreed to the meeting, and we set it up for a couple days later at this random restaurant. I wasn't looking forward to it at all, but what choice did I have? Now, I didn't tell my parents everything that had gone down right away. I mean, I filled them in a little, but I didn't go into all the messy details. When I finally did, they were, well, let's just say not pleased is an understatement. My dad was pissed. My mom was upset that I hadn't told them sooner, and they were both telling me to just walk away, forget about the money, and move on. But I couldn't do that. 6 years, thousands of dollars, and everything we had planned, just throwing that all away didn't sit right with me. I needed closure, or at least some kind of resolution. The day of the meeting rolls around and I'm driving back to my hometown, feeling a mix of anger, nerves, and, I don't know, maybe a little bit of hope. I still had that tiny part of me hoping Maya would come to her senses and realize she made a mistake. But who was I kidding, right? By the time I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, I was just ready for it to be over. When I walked in, they were already sitting at a table. Maya, her parents, and my parents. Maya looked different. I don't know how to explain it, but she had this weird, distant look in her eyes, like she was there physically but not really there. She wasn't the girl I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing her for what she really was now. Either way, it felt like I was sitting down with a stranger. I sat down across from her, and it was awkward as hell. No one said anything for a solid minute. We just sat there in this uncomfortable silence. Finally, Mark broke the ice. He started talking about the money and how we could settle it. He was being reasonable, trying to work out a plan for Maya to pay me back. But Diane? Oh, she was having none of it. She cut him off mid-sentence, saying something like, "Why should she have to pay him back?" I couldn't believe it. Diane actually tried to justify what Maya did, saying I'd wasted 6 years of her life, and that Maya deserved the money for putting up with me. She literally said that Maya deserved the money. I sat there, stunned. My mom gave me this look like, "Did you just hear what she said?" And I knew we were in for a long night. Maya finally spoke up, and of course, backed her mom. She didn't apologize. She didn't say she made a mistake. She just said she needed to move on, and that Aaron, yeah, the dude from the game, made her feel things I never did. I almost laughed. Like, seriously? She's gonna sit there and tell me some guy she met in a mobile game was more important than everything we'd been through together? The more they talked, the angrier I got. I could feel it building inside me, and I was trying so hard to stay calm. My dad had told me before the meeting, just listen, don't react. Let them talk, and you'll know what to do when the time comes. Easier said than done when they're sitting there trashing me, acting like I was the problem. Maya then tried to turn the whole thing around, making me out to be the bad guy for involving her parents. She said we should have handled this like adults, and that it wasn't their business. I was like, are you kidding me? You took our money and ran off to play house with some dude from the internet, and now I'm the immature one for trying to get what's mine. Mark stepped in again, trying to calm things down. He said he didn't agree with what Maya did, but that he was willing to help settle things fairly. Diane wasn't having it. She just kept saying, it's her money now, like we were in some kind of divorce settlement. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I looked straight at Maya and asked her one question. Why? That's it. Just why? Why did she do it? Why throw away 6 years for someone she didn't even know in real life? She didn't even hesitate. She just shrugged and said I was unhappy. It was never going to work. That's it. No guilt, no regret. Just flat out cold. I knew right then and there that I was done. Any hope I had of us working things out, of her coming back, was gone. She didn't care. She never did. After some more back and forth, Mark agreed to give me $3,000 up front and promised the rest would come in installments over the next couple months. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. We wrapped things up, and as we were leaving, Mark pulled me aside and apologized. He said he had no idea things had gotten this bad and that he was sorry for what Maya did. I appreciated it, but honestly, it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. When I got home that night, I just sat there thinking about everything that happened. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt empty. 6 years. And this is how it ended. Over some guy she met in a game. I don't know where to go from here, but I guess I'll figure it out. All I know is that I'm not waiting around for her to realize she made a mistake. I'm done. Update 1. All right, so after that disaster of a meeting, I thought I'd feel better, you know? Like, at least I'd gotten some of the money back and had some sort of closure. But honestly, it felt like nothing had really changed. Sure, I wasn't out the full $6,000 anymore, but the way Maya had acted, how cold and distant she was, it was eating at me. I couldn't shake this feeling like everything I'd believed in for the last 6 years was fake. It was like I was mourning a relationship that never really existed the way I thought it did. A couple days after the meeting, I was back at work, trying to keep my mind off everything. That's when the texts started coming in. Non-stop. Maya first, then her friends. At first, I wasn't even reading them. I'd glance at my phone during breaks, see a wall of messages, and just ignore it. I wasn't ready to deal with it. But curiosity got the best of me eventually, and I opened a few. Maya was pissed. Like, really pissed. She was calling me immature for involving her dad, saying I'd embarrassed her, that I should have just talked to her directly instead of bringing her family into it. Apparently, me getting my money back was some huge betrayal to her. Imagine that, right? I'm the one betrayed. But now I'm the bad guy for making her face the consequences. Typical. She went on and on about how I didn't understand her needs, and that I never supported her emotionally. I don't know what reality she's living in, but I was literally working 12-hour shifts to save for our wedding. If that's not support, I don't know what is. Her friends jumped in too, sending me messages about how I wasn't man enough for her, how Aaron was a better fit for her, and how I should just let her be happy. They acted like I was some villain standing in the way of her fairy tale love story with this online dude. I was honestly stunned. I mean, we're all adults here, but they were acting like high school bullies. I stayed quiet. I didn't respond to any of the texts. What was the point? They'd already made up their minds about me, and honestly, I didn't care enough to try and change it. But the more I stayed silent, the more aggressive the messages became. At one point, one of her friends, Tina, sent me this long rant about how Maya had been miserable for years and how she was just too scared to leave me. Apparently, the whole time we were together, Maya had been unhappy, and I just hadn't noticed. That part got to me. I won't lie. It made me question everything. Had she really been unhappy the whole time? Was I blind to it? Had I just been going through the motions while she was secretly miserable? But then I snapped out of it. No, that couldn't be right. If she was so unhappy, why didn't she ever say anything? Why go through all the motions of planning a wedding, of talking about our future together, if she was miserable? It just didn't add up. A few days later, I got a text from Mark again. This time, it was about something else entirely. He wanted to let me know that Maya had officially moved out of the apartment. We hadn't been living together for a while since I was working out of town, but this made it final. She packed up her stuff and left. Part of me was relieved. At least now I wouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of us running into each other at the apartment. But another part of me felt like this was it, the final nail in the coffin. It's crazy how quickly things can fall apart. Here's where things got really weird, though. The next day, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Aaron. Yeah, that Aaron. At first, I thought it was a joke, or maybe someone pretending to be him, but no, it was him. He introduced himself, said he was sorry for how things had gone down, and that he hoped I'd understand that he and Maya were meant to be. Meant to be? I didn't even know how to respond to that. He went on to say that he never meant to steal Maya from me and that it just happened. I could feel the anger rising again, but I kept my cool. He tried to play the victim, saying he had no control over how things unfolded and that he hoped we could be civil about everything. Like, dude, you've never even met her in person. You've only talked through a screen. But sure, you're meant to be. Give me a break. I didn't respond to him either. What was the point? I wasn't going to engage in some back and forth with a guy I didn't even know about a relationship I wasn't a part of anymore. It was pointless. But I gotta admit, seeing that message made it all feel even more surreal. I thought things couldn't get worse. But this? Getting a message from the guy who'd basically ruined my life telling me we should move on was like adding salt to the wound. After that, I tried to focus on myself. I stopped checking my phone as much, blocked Maya and her friends on social media, and just kept my head down at work. But there was this constant feeling of emptiness. Like I'd spent 6 years building this life with her, and now it was just gone. I didn't even know who I was without her. That was the hardest part. We'd been together so long that I forgot what it was like to just be me. My parents were worried about me, kept asking how I was doing, but I didn't have much to say. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling, so I just told them I was fine. But inside, I was anything but fine. I was lost. The worst part was knowing that Maya didn't care. She'd moved on, she had Aaron now, and I was just nothing. It was like I never even mattered to her. That realization hurt more than anything. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering what I could have done differently, how I didn't see it coming. But no matter how many times I went over it, the outcome was the same. She'd left me for someone else, and there was nothing I could do to change that. At this point, all I can do is move forward. It's not going to be easy, but I don't have much of a choice. I've got to figure out how to rebuild my life without her. It's going to take time, and I know there are going to be days when it feels impossible, but I'm done looking back. She made her choice, and now I've got to make mine. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. I never thought my life would turn into this kind of mess. But here we are. Hopefully things will get better from here. Only time will tell. Update 2. So things were starting to settle down a bit. I mean, they weren't great, but I'd blocked Maya, Aaron, and her friends on everything, and I was doing my best to just keep my head down, focus on work, and try to move on. It wasn't easy. Honestly, it felt like I was walking around with this heavy weight on my chest all the time. But I figured the less I thought about it, the better. No point dwelling on what I can't change, right? That plan was working. Until one day, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't really been in touch with many people outside of work and my parents, so when I opened the door and saw Maya standing there, my heart kind of stopped for a second. I hadn't seen her since that meeting with her parents, and honestly, I wasn't ready to face her again. But there she was, standing on my doorstep like nothing had happened, like she hadn't completely wrecked my life. I didn't know what to say. My first instinct was to just shut the door in her face, but something in the way she was looking at me stopped me. She looked different, nervous, maybe even scared. It wasn't the cold, distant Maya from before. This was something else. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quiet. I didn't want to, but for some reason I stepped aside and let her in. Maybe part of me was still hoping for some kind of closure. Or maybe I just needed to hear her admit that what she did was wrong. I don't know. She walked in, and we both stood there awkwardly for a minute. I wasn't about to offer her anything to drink or make her comfortable. She didn't deserve that after everything. I just wanted to hear what she had to say and get her out of my apartment as fast as possible. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I almost didn't believe it at first. Maya, the same person who had justified taking all the money, the same person who left me for a guy she never even met, was apologizing? It felt weird. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, waiting for her to continue. She fidgeted with her hands, something I hadn't seen her do in years. Maya was always so confident, so sure of herself. Seeing her like this was strange. "I messed up," she said, her voice shaking a little. "I know I hurt you, and I know I can't take it back, but I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realize now that I made a mistake." A mistake? That's what she was calling it now? A mistake is spilling coffee on someone's shirt? Leaving your boyfriend of 6 years for a guy you met through a game and taking all his money? That's not a mistake. That's a choice. I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall, still not saying anything. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. If she wanted to apologize, she was going to have to actually explain herself. She took a deep breath and continued. "I've been talking to Aaron, and it's not what I thought it would be. He's different than what I expected." There it was. I almost laughed. Of course, Aaron wasn't living up to her expectations. What did she think was going to happen? That this random guy from the internet was going to sweep her off her feet and give her the perfect life? "I thought I knew him," she said, her voice breaking a little. "But I don't. Not really. And now I realize that I threw away everything we had for nothing." That last part stung. Not because she was admitting she made a mistake, but because it felt like she was trying to paint herself as the victim here. Like she was the one who got tricked by Aaron, and now I should feel sorry for her. I finally spoke. "You didn't throw everything away for nothing. You made a choice. You chose him, and you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we had. You took the money, you lied, and you didn't even have the decency to apologize until now. So what do you want me to say, Maya? Do you expect me to just forgive you because you finally realized he's not who you thought he was?" She flinched at my words, and for a second I felt a little bad. But then I remembered everything she'd done, and that feeling was gone. "No," she said, her voice soft. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. That's all. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe she really was sorry, but another part of me knew better. This wasn't about me. This was about her feeling guilty and trying to make herself feel better. She wasn't here to fix things. She was here to clear her conscience. I don't need your apology, I said finally. What I needed was for you to not do this in the first place. And now, it's too late. You made your choice, and you're going to have to live with it. She didn't say anything after that. She just nodded, her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might break down right there in my apartment. But instead, she turned and walked toward the door. Before she left, she paused and looked back at me. I really did love you, you know. I didn't know how to handle everything. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was I supposed to say to that? She left, and I closed the door behind her, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. I stood there for a while, just staring at the door, trying to make sense of everything. I'd finally gotten the apology I thought I wanted, but it didn't make me feel any better. It didn't change what happened. It didn't undo the damage she'd caused. In the end, her apology was just words, and words weren't going to fix anything. Update 3. So after Maya showed up at my door with that half-hearted apology, I thought maybe that was the end of it. Like she'd gotten whatever closure she needed, and I could finally start putting it all behind me. But of course, life never works that easily. For a while, though, things went quiet. I didn't hear from her, Erin, or any of her friends. No texts, no random knocks on the door. It was almost peaceful, even though I still had this pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. A few weeks passed, and I was starting to get back into some sort of routine. I was working the same long hours, but now, at least, I was able to focus a little more. I hadn't thought about Maya much, except in those random moments where I'd catch myself wondering what I could have done differently. But I was starting to accept that sometimes there's nothing you can do. People make their choices, and you just have to deal with the fallout. Then, one day, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. I figured it was spam or some random work thing, so I ignored it at first. But when I checked it later during my lunch break, I nearly dropped my phone. It was Erin. Yeah, the guy she left me for. Again. I couldn't believe it. I thought this guy was done trying to reach out after that weird apology attempt before. But nope, here he was, sending me some long-ass message about how things between him and Maya weren't working out. He said he thought I deserved to know, that they'd broken up, and that he was sorry for how things had gone down. What the actual hell? I didn't even know how to react. Why did he think I cared? I mean, yeah, there was a part of me that wanted to laugh at how quickly it all fell apart for them, but mostly I just wanted him to leave me alone. I didn't respond. I wasn't about to get sucked into whatever drama was happening between them now. I blocked his number and tried to move on with my day. But it got me thinking, though. Like, what was Maya doing now that her little soulmate situation blew up in her face? Was she going to try crawling back to me? Part of me was almost expecting it, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't go down that road again. I couldn't let her back in after everything she'd done. Even if she came to me, I wasn't going to be her backup plan. A couple days later, I got my answer. I was sitting at home, just zoning out in front of the TV after another long shift, when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Erin. It was Maya. She was back. I hadn't heard from her since that awkward visit, so seeing her name pop up on my screen was like a punch in the gut. I stared at the message for a while, not sure if I should open it. Part of me was curious. Okay, maybe more than curious. But another part of me just wanted to delete it and move on. In the end, curiosity won out, and I opened the message. It was short, surprisingly. Just a simple, "Hey, I wanted to talk." That was it. No apology this time, no explanation, just that. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to decide how to respond. Should I ignore her? Should I tell her to F***K off? Should I hear her out? My mind was racing with 1,000 different thoughts, but in the end, I just replied with, "What do you want?" She replied almost instantly. She said she needed to talk to me about everything, that she realized she'd messed up, and she wanted to clear the air. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of meeting up with her again. But at the same time, I felt like maybe I needed to hear her out, if only to finally put an end to this chapter of my life. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We set up a time to meet at a coffee shop, somewhere public, neutral ground. I wasn't going to invite her back to my place, and I sure as hell wasn't going to hers. The day of the meeting came, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I kept telling myself that it didn't matter what she said, that nothing she could say would change what had happened. But still, There was that little part of me hoping she'd give me something, some reason, some closure that would make sense of it all. When I walked into the coffee shop, there she was, sitting at a table near the window. She looked different again. Not nervous like before, but not the confident, self-assured Maya I'd known for years either. She looked tired. I sat down across from her, and for a moment we just sat there in silence. It was awkward, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She finally spoke. "I'm sorry for everything." I didn't say anything. I just waited for her to continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, staring down at her coffee. "And I realized I didn't treat you fairly. I took advantage of you, of everything you did for me, and I was wrong." I crossed my arms, still not saying anything. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of thinking that her words were somehow making this all better. "I thought Aaron was what I wanted," she continued, her voice shaky. "But I was wrong about him. I was wrong about a lot of things." I raised an eyebrow. "So what? You're here now because things didn't work out with him? And I'm supposed to just, what, forgive you?" She shook her head quickly. "No, that's not why I'm here. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand how badly I hurt you." I sat back in my chair, still not sure what to make of all this. Part of me wanted to believe her, but another part of me was just done. I'd heard all this before, and it didn't change anything. "So now what?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Nothing," she said softly. "I just wanted to apologize, that's all." I stared at her for a moment, waiting for her to say more, but she didn't. It was like she had finally run out of excuses, out of explanations, and all that was left was this. I nodded slowly. "Okay, you've apologized. Now what?" She wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled weakly. "Now, I leave you alone." And with that, she stood up, gave me one last look, and walked out of the coffee shop. I sat there for a while, just staring at the empty seat across from me, feeling lighter. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe I could finally move on.